What if Tarble was in the Tournament of Power? So, Vegeta's brother Tarble, he's not very strong, and we don't open up with him screaming or powering up or doing anything that would be really ridiculous, I think, for his character, considering at least where we know his power scaling is at, and even though power scaling can be obsolete to some people. Um, Tarbo was never built like the other Saiyans. We know this. He wasn't ruthless. He wasn't ambitious, and he wasn't even pride driven like his brother Vegeta. And that's really why his father King Vegeta sent him away. Um, it's because he just didn't have any of the qualities that really suited what being a Saiyan warrior was about. But I think most fans assume that he would have been useless in the Tournament of Power as a result of not having these Saiyan related qualities at any premium. And that assumption is kind of true, but in the same sentence, it also misses, I think, an important point. That Tournament of Power obviously was not just about raw strength; it was about pressure. And I think, when you look at Tarble, his entire life was really pressure avoidance, right? If we look at Vegeta, his brother, on the other hand, Vegeta is the exact opposite outcome of the same upbringing that Tarble essentially had, right? Tarble retreated and essentially, if you want to say ran away, you can probably say that. Vegeta sharpened himself, became stronger, became more wise, became, more armor, more steeled. Tarble avoided conflict, right? We see his family and the wife he settled for. Vegeta ran towards conflict. He ran towards violence. He ran towards chaos. But here's the question I think no one really asks when it comes to Tarble and Vegeta is that what happens when the weaker brother is forced into the same arena as the stronger one? And it wouldn't be for Tarble necessarily to win and to prove anything like that to Vegeta, but I think it would be to survive his own existence, I guess, in a way where he doesn't feel like he has to run away and avoid his conflict. Vegeta can't even really reach him because Tarble is at the furthest depths of Universe 7. Like, think about that for a second. He's so far away in a random part of Universe 7. It's really hard for them to reach, and then they can't lock on to his power level, like outside of probably using the Super Dragon Balls or something funky like that to make a wish. Like, how are they going to find him even with all their technology? Goku can't just lock on to anything and anyone. It has to be a significant power level. And again, we know Tarble, from Vegeta's words, is not very strong. But getting back to Tarble, if he enters the Tournament of Power, it wouldn't be because he suddenly became strong. I think it would be because Vegeta pushed him and motivated him in some way, for better or for worse, to be in the Tournament of Power. Because the erasure of the universes forces Tarble to choose, and I think that changes everything for his character. Because his weakness, it looks like it was physical, and I don't know necessarily if you would really categorize it as physical. It's kind of like the Goku and Raditz situation, where technically if Raditz was able to stay alive and he didn't die in the earlier Saiyan saga, he should have the same potential to be just as strong as Goku, or weaker in a little bit of a sense. Tarble technically should be able to do something similar with Vegeta. But Tarble's weakness was, psychological. It wasn't necessarily physical. And of course, that psychological weakness can be even more damaging than a physical weakness. So Tarble believed he didn't belong in traditional Saiyan conflict. He really removed himself from it, I would say, entirely. And the Tournament of Power doesn't allow for that. It forces participation. And I think the void of what the Tournament of Power created, the collapsing stages, Tarble would stand there feeling like something is actually wrong. That discomfort would be, I think, the trigger point for him. He wouldn't be able to escape. Vegeta would be there constantly reminding him, what they're doing, powering up. Tarble would feel the clear gap. Goku would be pushing beyond his limits. Tarble would feel even more distance amongst himself and the other Saiyan warriors. And I think instead of breaking, Tarble would finally force that dormant side of him to surface in a way where he wouldn't have necessarily the Broly rage or some weird Vegeta pride. Some people probably compare it to what happened to Kabe, and some people would argue that Kabe was really created to kind of bring Tarble into Dragon Ball, like what people argued Kale's initial purpose was before Toriyama actually, re-rendered and remade Broly. It's still such a weird thing, that whole time period. But I like to stick to Tarble being Tarble and not necessarily just being like, oh, he's Kabe. Like they're not the same characters, even if they were inspiration or one was inspiration from another. They're not the same character. Um, yeah, I think it's important that Vegeta is there, and he's not going to train Tarble gently. He's not going to take it easy on him. He wouldn't force, Tarble to be in a position that would have him weak. You know what I mean? He's going to make Tarble uncomfortable. He's going to challenge him. He's going to make everything hard. He's going to seem cold. He's going to be very direct. And it's not because he hates his brother or at all. I don't think Vegeta hates Tarble. It's because Vegeta understands something, as an adult that maybe he didn't as a child. And he sees that avoidance creates weakness, right? Confrontation creates identity. And that has worked for Vegeta, right? And I think he would want that for his younger brother to see it from that perspective. So in the Tournament of Power, it would be the first time that Tarble, I think, would actually have to confront something that would force him to really reveal himself outside of just the saying that avoided conflict at all costs. So imagine a moment as we close out. Tarble's nearly eliminated. He's overwhelmed. He's not physically crushed, but he's mentally kind of frozen, paralyzed, and Vegeta doesn't try to save him. So Tarble's on his own. Vegeta's just watching. He's seeing what Tarble's going to do. His arms are crossed. He can be posted up anywhere. It's Vegeta, right? It doesn't matter. He's just waiting to see if his brother is actually going to have the balls and the guts to pull himself out of the fire and out of the mud. But if Tarble stands back up on his own, it would show Vegeta growth. It would be growth for Tarble as well. But if Tarble chose not to stand up and kind of let himself roll over and, call it quits, then Tarble was never meant to be there. And I think that's fascinating thing about really what characters could have been in the Tournament of Power, and specifically Tarble being related to one of the most popular characters and one of the most important characters in the series now. There's such a pressure that would have been brought with this character had a universe or a timeline conspired for him to be there. It would be the most pressuring situation he would have ever been in his life, like by far, right? So that's one side of it. And if you want to look at a side where Tarble doesn't necessarily become one of the strongest fighters in the Tournament of Power, but he becomes someone that's able to, thrive and kind of look up to Vegeta, look up to the Saiyan culture instead of the opposite, which is essentially he kind of, I don't know if he despises the Saiyan culture. I think he just looks at it as kind of a wasteless, way to go about living what would be considered life. And for what it's worth, it feels like Tarble's probably going to be the forgotten brother unless someone has an idea to bring him back. So I think his Tournament of Power influence would have been more of a personal journey as opposed to him actually having a real influence on Universe 7 in any way. Because again, unless he taps into a Gohan like rage where he gets an insane power boost, I just don't think the power would have been long lasting for him to have made a significant impact. Even if he did have a brief moment of a surge, it would have been more of him breaking his own limits and avoiding the quote unquote conflict that he had been running from his whole life. And I think that would have been an interesting twist on his involvement in the Tournament of Power. Again, not from a position of strength, but more so from a psychological position of a Saiyan warrior, never having been in a position of being exposed, being weak, having a brother that could help, but is choosing to watch, his younger brother pick himself up. I wish we could have saw that. And we saw, as I guess, glimpses with Vegeta and Kabe, but again, there's not a family relationship, blood relationship dynamic there. Tarble being there changes the entire, I think the entire magnitude of just what even the Tournament of Power means. Having him be there, Vegeta, I don't know if he would want his brother to essentially be eliminated or if he would care. I guess it depends on your personal thoughts. So let me know your thoughts.